Hello, I'm Maria Delgado, and I'm one of the directors of the third edition of the Theatre Times International Online Theatre Festival. And this year, we're delighted to be collaborating for the first time with the European Theatre Convention, or ETC, showcasing 10 productions from their Renaissance season of 22 5-minute works, commissioned from different member theatres, from the Schatzspielhaus Dresden to the Croatian National Theatre, across 18 countries. They're streaming on the ETC website from the 10th of May to the 4th of June. And we're showing 10 of them on our website, on the Theatre Times website during the festival. Renaissance looks at the rebirth of theatre, its possibilities and its potentialities, with each of the films providing a different perspective on what looking ahead might mean as theatres look to a post-COVID, or indeed a living with COVID future. Today, we're going to be discussing the Renaissance project by hearing from representatives of 3 of the theatres who've presented the work as part of the season, and they're each going to reflect on their contribution to the project. From Théâtres de la Ville de Luxembourg, its director Tom Leick-Burns, and also we're joined by Ian de Toffoli, who was one of the artists responsible for their contribution to the project. From Dakh Theatre, the Centre of Contemporary Arts, delighted to welcome the curator of the contribution, Andrew Palatnyi. And from Teatru Malta, Sean Buhagiar, the artistic director, who also wrote and directed the theatre's contribution to the season. Also joining us is ETC's executive director, Heidi Wiley. Welcome to you all. Heidi, I'm going to ask you to kick off by asking you about the rationale for commissioning the project. What led you to decide that you were going to embark on this project, and what did you hope to achieve with it?
Thanks, Maria, for this wonderful introduction. Well, at the heart of the European Theatre Convention, which is Europe's network of public theatres and covers 25 countries, lies international artistic collaboration. That's what each of the venues that joins us and wants to work with theatres in the ETC is looking for. But then 14 months ago, with borders closed and international travel impossible, with limited or no audiences able to enter our theatre halls, we wanted to find a new way for our member theatres to continue making work together from a safe distance and to present and promote their works to wider audiences. And this was when we, at the beginning of this year, really asked ourselves, well, how can we continue doing this, still having hopes before that we can go back to some of our previous programs. And that's when we decided, and I discussed this also with our colleague and the president of the ETC, Serge Rangoni, who's the director of the Théâtres de Liège. And he suggested, well, why don't we really create something new and commission our member theatres works that is asking the very relevant questions of right now. How can we continue working together? How can we actually find a new future for theatre, going back from or learning from the history, looking at Renaissance, how can the rebirth of theatre look like? And for us, this was a way of finding new ways of telling stories that travel by themselves instead of traveling physically. And also it's been an important way to experiment with the digital screen, to define the new digital dramaturgies and to be also at the heart of determining what and how we will be telling theatre with the new technologies.
Tell me about, the term Renaissance, you define it as a dramatic prompt for each of the contributions. How much detail did you provide? Was it literally just that word, or what was the kind of remit or parameters that you gave to each theatre? Because obviously some of them are slightly longer than 5 minutes. One of the ones we're going to be discussing today is just over 3 minutes. So tell us a little bit about the parameters for the project and the kind of the script or the guidelines you gave to each of the theatres.
Interesting that you're asking this, because obviously this was one of the discussions we had as a starting point. Basically, we said, let's keep things simple, because we were in a situation, and most of our theatres are still coming out of the now 3rd lockdown. Back at the time, it was the 2nd lockdown. So most of our venues were very busy in organizing themselves, of reopening, rescheduling, planning the uncertainties. that lie ahead of us. So we said, let's see if we can make a 5-minute video under the theme of Renaissance, keeping it artistically very open, because that's also, I think, always the beauty of working with all our different member theatres, that the diversity is very huge in what each of one associates with certain terminologies and perspectives. And we had a discussion with everyone who was interested, and many of our theatres joined. And that was, for me, I think, one of the most inspiring moments in this pandemic, to see how much commitment there was to look at this terminology and to start using it in a very artistic and inspirational way.
When I watch the films, it reminds me of a jazz riff in many ways, where you give somebody a line and they'll improvise around it and create a whole kind of piece around it. So when I was watching them, it really did, for me, it felt like one of the closest things to jazz that I've seen in terms of contemporary theatre's response to COVID. I don't know what you think about that reflection.
Yeah, I like this kind of analogy to the project. I also watched it all in one row, and I was so amazed by the diversity and the differences also in how it was worked on and presented. I think we really have 22 distinct approaches to the rebirth of theatre, of the associations that come to one's mind when thinking about it, but also the different situations that each of the artists were situated in, and what came to one's minds in making artistic works out of it.
Absolutely, and I think in many ways also how each of the theatres reflects on themselves and their own roles. I thought there was some really lovely detail in a number of them. The Maltese example is a very good one, and maybe we can discuss that in a short while, where they're actually positioning their own work within a wider geographical context of the city that they're based in, the community that they're part of. And it seemed to me that it was also, in some cases, a reflection on audiences and participation, and what that might mean in a post-COVID era.
Absolutely. Yes, and I think it was striking. One of our colleagues told me, well, Heidi, I couldn't believe how different we are all in presenting our work, starting from the same source. And I think that's really a very good reflection on what brings us together, same ideas, same starting points, but then how we actually use them, transform them into our own settings. This is then giving the bigger picture. And I think that's maybe also one of the new ways for us to continue on how to exchange works, how to remain connected while building the bigger picture with a lot of different contributions.
Great. Let me bring in some of the member theatres, and I'm going to start with Le Théâtre de la Ville de Luxembourg and invite Tom and Ian to talk about perspective, their contribution. Tom, tell us a little bit about how you approached this from the theatre's perspective, and how you brought Ian and director Rationale into the Pierrelot into the project.
Well, I think it's you always try and match the right artists for the right project. And, when we knew it was going to be a project about the Renaissance and that needed a writer, and also we wanted to have someone who really maybe approaches this in an innovative way and be very imaginative with it. So I think very early on, we really thought that Rationale, she would have that that approach, and Jan, whom we've worked with many times, and we know he has a passion for mythology, for history, and developing themes around that. So I think it was a very quick decision, and since we had to be quick in a way because there wasn't that much time, we very quickly decided on Ian and Rationale to join the project.
And you say you didn't have long to make it. I'm going to bring Ian in. How long from actually being told by Heidi, do you want to be involved in this, to actually delivering the final product, so to speak, to the ETC?
Oh, I guess it wasn't much more than a month for us, I think, because everybody was obviously very busy the situation, the COVID situation didn't make things easier to gather a team, because all right, Rationale and me wrote and directed it, but obviously we had the whole team around it, from the actor Annette Schlechter to the cameraman and the post-production. Gathering this team in such a short time was quite the challenge, but the idea was quickly, let's say, developed by Rationale and me, and then afterwards making it happen, creating the special effects that are finally in the movie, and the shooting, which was sometimes a bit of a, let's say, a wild guerrilla shooting through Luxembourg City. Well, that was a real challenge.
And what made you go to the sculptor and architect Filippo Brunelleschi? Because I mean, obviously, he's partly responsible for a lot of some really interesting articulations around perspective and ways of seeing. So, what made you fix on this figure and his ideas on perspective, and the idea of how representation of an object allows us to look beyond the object itself for the central focus of your film?
All right. Let me try and develop this. Thing is, from the beginning of the pandemic on, when theaters closed down, one of the things I reflected on most is the importance of storytelling, of stories in a very archaic way. What happens to people if they're not able to receive stories anymore that are told by narrators, be it theater or even movies, or even just sitting down with friends through a whole evening and retelling what happened during the day. And so, why do we need storytelling, I thought, and why is it so important that we continue ways of going through stories? It's because stories are our ways of understanding the world. It's simple. It's a kind of lens through which you observe the world and you try to understand it. It's the reason why I became a writer is because I don't understand the world and I'm trying to explain it to myself. So from that idea of a lens, I remembered Brunelleschi's experiment, because this experiment in Renaissance Florence was all about a new kind of realism. He used the experiment to create some sort of awe and some sort of almost shock in spectators who looked through a tiny hole in a wooden block at a painting which was more realistic than the object itself, a little further in the distance. And then I thought, well, there is a parallel between storytelling in itself and how theater does storytelling and this experiment. And I thought, okay, one of the main problems with theaters being shut down is this lack of almost of a tool that helps us understand our world. Theater and storytelling as a tool of understanding humankind, in a way. That's all a bit grandiloquent here, but you understand what I'm saying. And I thought, okay, so I will try to express this lack of a tool of understanding the world through the retelling of this experiment, but obviously accompanying it with pictures that do not illustrate the historical setting, obviously, but what theater does today. The quick change of settings, the illusion, the story in itself, the way that theater is a place out of space and time, but can be everywhere at the same time. The interchangeability of characters in theater, etc. All of this. So theater as a way of looking at things. And that is, obviously, I think that is what we severely missed during this year of the pandemic. theater as a way of helping us cope with things. And as I said, as a tool. And that's what we tried to express in a movie where nothing is really what it seems.
And I mean, one of the things I really liked, because obviously you're dealing with looking at how theatre operates and how theatre creates illusion. And I wondered, you know, you talk about realism, and of course, one of the great reinventors and re-questioners of realism in the theatre in the aftermath of the Second World War, another time of seismic change for Western human civilization, of course, was Beckett. And when I saw The Mouth, I wondered if there was a lovely reference to Not I, to Beckett's Not I, which again was asking us to think again about perspective and the ways in which we thought about the world and imagined the world following a period of catastrophe.
Absolutely, absolutely. Beckett is one of my, let's say, mentors, has been for a very long time. But even as I put the stress on storytelling a few minutes before, even through his way of telling stories where apparently nothing much is happening, stories where people wait or are lost, or but that's what a spectator at the first moment sees, whereas everything, the essential things are happening inside or hidden beneath the surface. And that's a very important link to Beckett. Beckett wrote theater at a time where artists thought nothing can be said anymore after a catastrophe such as the Second World War. Well, obviously, it was only about finding another way of saying things.
And isn't that what theatre has always done from the Greeks onwards in many ways? And we'll come to Dakh theatre's contribution a little bit later, which takes us back to ancient civilizations and asks us to look back in order to be able to understand the present and perhaps to prepare for the future. I'm going to, I mean, obviously, I love what you're talking about, the idea of theatre allowing us to redevelop and see anew, because you have an actress at a particular age of her life, but one of the things about the performance I like so very much is the way you play with sound, but also the way in which that body and that face is reconfigured, that theatre allows for reconfiguration. Of course, if we think about commedia, you could be 80 and play a 15-year-old. That theatre has always been about potentiality and about envisaging and the imagination. And it seemed to me that was at the core in many ways of your film.
Absolutely, about the infinite possibilities of what is seen on stage. Absolutely. You see this during the film, you see this beautiful, am I allowed to say, wrinkled face? All the while you hear this very deep male voice just telling the story about the experiment, while she goes through something completely different. The discovery of her own face, the discovery of a city, of landscapes in the distance, and suddenly these landscapes are more on paper than they are existing in real life. So yes, that was it. There was also a research, but that's obviously also renowned Pierlot's very important work here, an aesthetic research being done here about what theatre can do, the infinite possible worlds of theatre.
Thank you. And I'm going to invite Sean and Teatru Malta to come in now, because we've just talked about Annette being at a particular moment in her life. And Sean, you go for a young girl in yours who has the potentiality and the possibilities of her whole life ahead of her. Tell us a little bit about the idea for your piece, which you wrote and directed, to have a girl at the very center, a young girl discovering the world at the very center.
Yes. First of all, I'd just like to say, because it's really curious, because Beckett wrote Not I in Malta after visiting the Cathedral of St. John and Caravaggio's beheading. but that's just a nice anecdote, which it's a coincidence, a nice coincidence. So yes, we decided to tackle Rinascimento, we called it, which is Renaissance in Maltese, from the point of view of a little girl. The reasons were that when our team came together and we brainstormed some possibilities within the time frame, which was quite limited, we decided to use the tools, or rather the projects we were currently doing. One project was a festival we do every year where we get schools to participate in a theater making process. So from literally choosing the text, brainstorming the text, to actually making and producing the show, which is called Tricky Tracky. And Leia has participated more than once in this. And we decided to work with Leia to create the story. So that was at the basis of it. But this process took us through the whole script, because one thing we are doing, we decided as a national theatre to go into R&D right during COVID. So we're not actually producing right now. We're doing a lot of R&D, working on scripts, working with rehearsals, working in the room due to the situation. And one thing we're also doing is that we're publishing a number of books with a company that's called Gutenberg Press, and that was obviously an obvious link to the Renaissance. So whilst brainstorming the script, we also found that link. We spoke to Leia and we tried to create this journey of a kid trying to deal, a kid that loves theater. Ultimately, it's a very simple story: a kid that loves theater trying to deal with the fact that she cannot make theater in the way we know it, and she has to deal with the digital transition of theater, but also hoping towards doing theater again, and a newer theater. I would say, if I had to choose one word to tell you what the film is about, I think it's about hope. Because ultimately the way we saw it, or the way even I personally saw it, is that I'm not a fan of this digitization of theater and the theater going online in general. I read with interest an interview with Thomas Ostermeyer, who said it's like methadone for heroin addicts, and I tend to agree, because ultimately, even when we talk about this new field, I don't think it's new at all. It's a bit of an offense to people like Vito Conci and Joan Jonas, who made video art, made all sorts of beautiful video art. So it's just that now everyone had to go there in terms of theater. So our decision to go into R&D, to wait for us to be able to make theater as we know it, maybe a newer theater, maybe a better theater, but still theater in the form of a live encounter between audience and actor. So this filtered into our film and the story, and how ultimately the little girl goes to actually read about theater and read stories. I was very interested in the way Ian was putting the emphasis on storytelling. Yes, ultimately it's the desire to tell stories, the hope that we will tell stories again to each other, maybe not through a screen, but if we have to, it's so necessary, it's so important that we'll also do it through a screen. But it's because we have to, because if we had to choose, I think if Leia had to choose, and she answered that even in other interviews, she would prefer the live aspect. So that's why then you end with the empty book, because we also treated it with a kind of magical realism lens. So there's kind of this realism, but there's also this magic and this circumstance that is a bit surreal.
Can I come back to two ideas? One is the idea of the book, because we often, acting is such an active mode of reading is such an active mode of engagement alongside acting. So the idea that when you read a book, it becomes a new thing through your engagement as a reader with it. And I love the fact that, I think it's the first book she reads is Oliver Twist, which is also about a curious child, a child who engages with the world and tries to shape the world. And of course, Charles Dickens was a wonderful storyteller. If you think about the way he published his novels as installments that kind of grabbed a reader. So here you're taking the work of one of the master storytellers of the 19th century as a way of hooking in, and also a piece about child agency and a child's entrepreneurship in terms of navigating a difficult world. So I wondered if you might talk about the choice of Oliver Twist as the first book that she reads, but also this idea of reading as a really active, pleasurable, intense experience where you recreate the book in your imagination, because that's one of the things that struck me about your contribution to the season.
Yes, ultimately, obviously, many stories are read first before actually being acted or being created. Although obviously we as a National Theatre, we make all kinds of theatre, and even theatre that is post-dramatic in a way. But in terms of dealing with Leah's point of view on theatre and the kids that were in Tricky Tracky, they're used to starting from a book or starting from a story or being inspired by a book. Yes, we did use Oliver Twist. I think it was the second book though, because the first book was by a local author called Trevor Zara, is Sir Must, which is the headmaster. It's a funny story in a school. But all the books we chose at first, at least before she got more complicated books, you are right. They were books that we thought would inspire children to want to tell their own stories, to be in that story, but also to want to tell their stories. I also believe that the way an actor reads a book is different to a way a non-actor would read a book. So she performs while reading. She thinks she's in the story, and I find that the stories in books right now can give us a lot of inspiration, a lot of hope. Again, I keep coming back to hope, and Oliver Twist is that kind of story. Where it inspired a lot of I mean, Dickens in general inspired a lot of other arts. But I do believe that, I mean, even in not just in theatre, but even in film, most films start from books. So the idea of books leading us to other arts like theatre is very strong in the movie, and it's also there because right now reading a book is very possible, right? It's more possible than going to the theater. So we wanted to make a film with the possible, but also showing what's in store, right? What are we hoping for? What do we expect to do after this? Because we also believe that it isn't really a renaissance right now. We hope that the renaissance is coming. That's the idea of the empty book, but we're not in a renaissance. We're in a liminality of sorts, where we don't know where we are, because it's the pandemic, it's the post-pandemic. Is it going to be a post-pandemic? I mean, history tells us it will be, but this liminality, this not knowing, I mean, can you go in the library? Can you get the book? She doesn't see anyone whilst doing that. Was an important part of our thought process. So the idea that the Renaissance hasn't started yet, but that we hope and we want it to start through the books, through the inspirations.
And just before I move on to Dakh Theatre, I mean, the other thing I loved is the use of indoor space. We've all spent a lot of time indoors during lockdown and the pandemic. But one of the things that's wonderful about the way Leah takes over the printing press headquarters and the library is she makes it almost an adventure playground. So she converts the interior space almost into the kind of activities you'd associate with the exterior space, with the outdoors. And the way she climbs up the ladder in the library is almost as if she were in an adventure playground in a park. So I love this idea of you encouraging us to see indoor space as with potentiality, with possibilities, with a freedom to be able to run and envisage yourself anew in these indoor spaces that we've all spent a lot of time indoors over the past year.
Yes, and the idea to work with a child was that, right? Because I mean, seeing indoors from the eyes of a child, I think we all miss that. the idea of just staying under a sheet and creating a world of possibilities under a sheet. I think every adult should miss that. I do. And the idea of her dealing with these spaces as if, yes, she's climbing the stairs of a ship, not of a library, or there's also, we left it a bit open as to whether the printing press is a dream or not a dream. I must admit that whilst writing it, I envisaged it as a dream. In fact, that's why she deals with the space in this performative way. So she's imagining, she's enjoying it. But yes, that's a very good analysis of what we've done, because we wanted to see how she would deal, how she as a kid who wants to make theater would deal with being confined in four walls. Even the spaces we chose were not huge spaces besides the printing press, but even the library was quite a small library. That's in Medina. So yes, the idea of indoors and the way we can reimagine indoor space, reimagine performance in non-theatrical spaces was also part of the way we wanted to communicate with this film.
And of course, she's running through the streets of what I presume is Valletta at one moment as well, which again links it to the geographical spacing of Malta.
Yes, but that's Medina, it's the old capital.
Oh, it's the old, okay.
It's even older than Valletta, because the library is in a palace called Palazzo Falzon. It's a curated library, and she's running in Medina. Yes, we've used practically 3 locations. So one is the actual theater, because as a national theater, we don't produce in one space, we use different spaces, and this festival is in a theater in Msida. Then she goes to Medina, and then she goes to the printing press, who's also our collaborator, which is on the southern side of the island. So yeah, I mean the link with the space here, we wanted it to be in the film because ultimately we're doing it here.
Great, thank you. Let me bring Andrew in from Dakh Theatre Centre of Contemporary Arts. And Andrew, you also are going back in time. And I think one of the things that unifies all 3 of the pieces is they're all about journeys in many ways. But you're beginning with a question: why is the world so unfair and cruel? And it's quite a kind of, it's quite an in-your-face question to be asking when the Renaissance is about looking forward. Tell us a little bit about the idea of that question as the first thing that you throw out at the viewer.
Thank you for question. Yeah, first, what I would like to say that generally when ATC proposed this topic and this concept, we immediately agreed because we feel that it's honestly, it's a really unique and at the same time amazing opportunity together to make this digital adventure, and in this time of impossibility to meet physically, to keep relationships. So for me, the main value of Umbrella project is that it really gives possibility to us to be together. At the same time, we have 2 different perspectives from how this project influenced on Ukrainian theatrical area and Ukrainian perspective, how we look on this project and this topic. And if we combine these 2 optics, we receive maybe a real possibility for meeting, a real possibility for exchange. And it's really amazing because so many diverse formats, so many diverse messages, aesthetics, text, acting, etc. So I mean, it's really a wonderful interface that that support this idea how to be together, how to ask each other, not always simple questions. And if we go to the question from which we start, it's a part of the text which were created during lockdown. It's a part of the new drama which we create, which a solo text like talk with God. So it's a man or woman. It could be acting with different actor or actress. So the main idea that it's talk, conversation inside you. That's why in our case, actors make solo reading, because the structure of the text is a dialogue. Like you ask, God answer, and this is the way. But then we understand that it should be presented as a solo monologues, which gives more stronger feeling of messages. At the same time, it was some experiment how to meet all text from Shakespeare, Sonnet 77, which was already used in the musical tract from ethno house band Dakh, which is very important for Ukrainian culture. It's our production, but maybe it's the most famous internationally musical theatrical band. And this new text, which were created as a reflection on a quarantine feeling and everything that happened during the last 2 years. So we meet this, we create this meeting of the text, and then we add this new technology which we start research immediately when first lockdown came. We create laboratory of looking for solution in digital. We called it LCD, Google Fest, and we found a new aesthetic which we called canvas. This technologically multi-screen, which very important. It is simultaneous. It is with one shoot, and it means that actors are really prepared in another way to make it real. So they have no rights to make mistake during the video. So it's something that gives this feeling and risks from real theater, when here and now you do and audience see. So for us, it was this combination of new text, old text, music, and technological, in some way simple technology, because it's accessible gadgets. We did it with simple smartphones in a small place with different artificial but really unique elements. All these objects that you see during the performance, it's something that has a history. There are everything from different performances that we did earlier, or from different elements that we found in Ukrainian culture. So it's really trying to, in one video, to create this bridge between old time and a new time. And as Sean told before, this hope, in our case, yes, it's hope and it's dream. It's some dream that, but with real action. It's something that we need to start to do from now, not just to wait for better time. In our case, we need to really to be very proactive in creative art, in keeping audience, in keeping our relationship between inside country and outside. And just to confirm it, I think it was really interesting experience, because now I am in Mariupol, where we did festival, big festival outside and inside. And you know, Mariupol, it's really very close to a conflict district. And this Renaissance project was continue life as a physical installation. We create a space in an old house of culture from Soviet Union. Now it's a revitalization space to a contemporary new multidisciplinary center, which is really very important as an infrastructure, new infrastructure for Ukraine in generally. And we create here this exhibition during weekend. We show all videos, and it was multimedia stage designed 360 degrees, and people could see, lay on the floor, just have time with this video and think, rethink, ask question. And I think it's also a good fact how online projects, how video projects could be transmitted to offline formats.
Yeah, and that's really nice, because it links into the point Sean was making, that his film came from the fact that there'd been a stage life and a stage activity that Leigh had been part of that led to this screen activity.
Yeah.
And you're mapping a relationship from the live experience and live work to a digital space, to an afterlife in a new kind of installation space. So I love the idea that it's also a continuum, that the films exist discreetly in their own way, but also have a pre-life, if you like, and an afterlife within the theatrical context that generated them. Tell me about the use of the 77th sonnet, Shakespeare's 77th sonnet, because the sonnet is also about, I mean, we've talked about time being also there in perspective, the idea of time pressing, time passing, the way Shakespeare's sonnet deals with the way we record impressions, how we learn from that which we, the ways we write, and how we later encounter that which we write. And so it seems to me that the sonnet itself, of course, feels very timely, and Shakespeare, of course, arguably the most resonant writer of the Renaissance.
Yeah, absolutely right. And yes, this thesis, time, and our feeling of time have a different feeling of time. And of course, during the quarantine, I think this understanding of time really changed because this impossibility to live as we lived earlier, this fast life way, this when society ran forward, quarantine as a strange feeling, but it's give all to us opportunity to make some stop, to rethink what is time for us individually, what is value to spend the time with a partner, colleague, with the other human being, and at the same time, it's another feeling when time is not abstract category, something like inertia category. It's something really very concrete, which we could influence. And if we would like to have future tomorrow, we need to start today to do. And this is what we try to put in this video. Yeah, this aesthetic, of course, it's not the theater as a classical way of thinking, but it's some value from the theater, which we try to find a new instruments to continue build interface between audience and theater as it is. So maybe how it looks could change, but the theater core is still the same for us.
And I'm going to invite all of you to come in now, because I'm going to ask you if there's something that you will take from these projects into your own future work. And of course, you know, you talked at the beginning, Andrew, about Braka's Ethno Chaos, but and obviously a band that's well known outside the Ukraine, but uniquely identified with the Ukraine. But there was something about the ways in which those voices were layered, the polyphony, which of course is an idea that one associates with the music of the Renaissance also. So this idea of the ways in which we think about things that appear very contemporary and very modern, but that are rooted very much in the past. And I was thinking about the interlaying of the human head, the live human head with the classical heads, and the ways in which we think about how we interact and intersect with the past. And it seems to me all three of these pieces are about how we engage with the past as a way of understanding the present and preparing for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would like also to add, another key maybe thesis which we used and which we think it was word genesis, because this Renaissance push us to this rethinking how we need to, at the same time, to take care about past on a different distance, like roots, and at the same time how we modulate our future, because we have absolutely different situation, and we live absolutely in turbulent, unpredictable world. And what to do? Are we able to use our past as some support for us, or it's something that we need to forget because we need to move forward? This is crossroads. We don't have answer on it, but this is what really Renaissance gives as a space to think about such type of questions.
Yeah, and maybe the past, or engaging with the past, is also about remembering better. that we know that remembrance and memory is selective, and we also know the ideological implications of it when you erase histories, and those histories, you know, Derrida reminds us of hauntology, they come back to haunt us. So what is our ethical responsibility in the way in which we engage with history, in the hope of presenting, it can never be complete, our retelling, but an ethical retelling that recognizes those contradictory elements at play. Let me bring in, before we finish, the rest of our contributors. Sean, what will you take from this project as you move forward from the R&D era that you've been in into taking the theatre, Teatru Malta, forward?
Well, we're already very excited because we're planning a project in December, so you can imagine how much we want to get back on stage. I think what will ultimately take is the fact that even though it's been rough and it's been a sad time for theatre, we've also had some very intimate moments between the sector. The sector came together. Projects started just because of random conversations through some talks we had, and I think the story the film tells is one where whatever happens, we make the best of the present in the hope for the future, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to make the best of this time right now through more R&D, through preparing more stories, but we hope to present them to a live audience soon, to do it well and to do it better in a way, because now the flexibility of online documentation has done something. So we're trying to analyze how to do it better, and that's, I think, what the story of the film says. On a more practical level, I think that the film brought a lot of artists to collaborate together, like the composer, who did a wonderful job in my opinion, and even the other films I watched were a product of a lot of collaboration. You could see that there were many artists involved, and I think that artists want now to collaborate more than ever, to come together more than ever, and it's I think that's the biggest advantage that COVID did to us, the bringing together of the sector even more.
Let me invite Ian and Tom to come in. Your quote, Sean, remind me about failing and trying better. Again, I go back to Beckett from Westward Ho: ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better, fail again. Maybe this project is about us learning to try again and to fail better as we mould not just a new theatre, but a new society. Tom and Ian, let me invite you both to come in. What will you take from this project into your future work?
Well, one thing is for sure is that how powerful it can be to create work that is really timely and that is really about now, with our usual timelines of producing work or planning seasons like 18 months in advance. This was really an amazing experience to have something happen, you know, get an idea, get the artists together and having happen something at a very short piece of time that was really relevant. And I suppose ultimately that's what we want to do. That's the if the theatre is supposed to be the mirror of society, then we also have to rethink about how we work and to allow us space and time to react to what's going on in the world. So that's certainly one thing that we'll take forward. And the other thing is that we're all really connected and that we're not just an island in Luxembourg or wherever we may be. And the power of the European Theatre Convention, the power of all collaboratively working on that same topic, showing that diversity, but also realizing that we are also connected in history, and that going back and going forward, this is only one moment in time, and that we have to respect our history, but that we also have to be brave and bold going forward. So connected among ourselves and also connected through history. I think these are really things that we easily forget when we are in our daily business, one project after another and another premiere and another, but actually stopping for a moment and taking that all in. That's why this project has been absolutely wonderful, and I think it's brought us all closer again, and I think we will look to each other more in the future and share more our experiences and how it compares to where we are in a network that is so different and so wide. It's a different situation, of course, in Ukraine than in Luxembourg or even, in Malta. So I think that is really something we will hope that even post-pandemic, when we hope that we're not going to go back to the old routine, and that we can keep hold of this moment of taking that time to respond, to share, and to stay connected.
Ian.
I mean, Tom talked beautifully about all the practical side of this. I also felt that during these times of crisis that the theater was very supportive in Luxembourg here, and I was very grateful for this. But now, if I can maybe add something on the more metaphysical side of things, this project during these heavy times was also like a sharpening of senses for me. You suddenly have the impression of a heightened consciousness of some of the archaic needs that theater responds to. And that's what I take from this project here. It's a going back to the essential questions of what we do, and you can end with Beckett here, because that's exactly what he did. It's some sort of very almost, even though it's a very dangerous word, but almost a pure form of theater, unburdened by what can be only distractions, and that going back to the essential, that's, I hope, what we are doing right now.
You say we end with Beckett. I'm actually going to end with Heidi, because she began our discussion. And Heidi, what comes next? Will there be a renaissance too? I was thinking, as listening to you all speak, that obviously after the Great Depression, after the Great War, at the end of the First World War, we had the Roaring Twenties, that there was a need to be out there, to be celebrating life as you emerged from annihilation and horror. And I wonder whether, will you give us a Roaring Twenties as the next project for asking your member theatres to reflect on what the future might be? Heidi.
Yes, Maria, that's exactly what we have set out to do. We had our last conference calling Designing the Next Decade. Out of it came Renaissance. And I was very, very touched also listening to you all now, how you worked with this project and what it meant to you. And I think it shows really that cooperation is the only means to overcome this current situation, which has hit our sector the hardest in all of Europe. I think it's just striking. 90% of revenues were lost in the performing arts last year alone. And that was, more than any other industry. And out of this, that we managed to work with 250 artists, pulling off this project with the means and the creativity that we've got. I think that's crucial, and also the role that we have to play in society to inspire people to go out and to not just hide ourselves in our offices or in our homes, because I think there's also a big threat right now. It's not just that borders were closed and that we couldn't travel again, but also the budgets and financial situations in each of our communities, cities, regions, countries. It's going to be quite a challenge to keep fighting for the budgets that we need to maintain international collaboration, because the predictions are that the further we want to go out, the further we want to collaborate with people that are not as close as we are, the more difficult it will be to finance this. But then also we have, Tom said it, we are now living in a time of transition. There are new strategic questions that we have to ask ourselves, what time and world we want to live in. So all the questions of sustainability, of being more diverse, how do we use the new technologies? That's part of what we want to use wisely, so that it is to the benefit of the artists working and making and creating theatre, but also to the people that actually can enjoy this art form, and that we are continuing to be also a place where we hear multiple forms, multiple voices and stories and languages. And with national governments rising also across Europe, that this is something that we need to defend and continue doing so. And when I was watching one of the videos of the behind the scenes work where Lea from Malta, I think 10-year-old girl was asked, well, how do you think the pandemic affected theater? And she just said, well, it didn't bring us down. This one sentence. I was just in awe. And then she said, when asked how she thinks the digital use is changing theater, she said, well, we learned some things. And I think that's exactly the way to go forward, building and trusting and the value that we have and continuing to play our part to create a better world. That's our role and goal for the next season.
Absolutely. Thank you. I mean, it reminds me of the Greeks invented theatre at the same time as they invented democracy as a way of thinking about how to make the world. Theatre was a way of reflecting on the world that needed to be made and maintained. And I think your project has reminded us of theatre's continuing role as a space for discussion, debate and democracy. Can I thank you all, Heidi and the ETC, but all of you from Théâtres de la Ville de Luxembourg, from Dakh Theatre Centre of Contemporary Arts, from Teatru Malta, Andrew, Sean, Ian, Tom, Heidi, thank you so very much and best of luck moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. I will send a copy to Heidi and to the ETC to circulate to you all, and we'll have it up on the website this afternoon. Thank you so very much. It was a wonderful discussion. You were all terrific talking about your pieces. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you so much for selecting our work.
Oh, we loved it. We loved them all. And they all spoke to each other in such wonderful, wonderful ways. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye.